Hey, have you heard? A major gun manufacturer has finally agreed to take steps to make their products safer and help reduce gun violence. How? Well, they agreed to develop a smart gun that can only be unlocked and fired with the owner's fingerprint. They agreed to establish a code of conduct for gun dealers to help prevent thefts and gun trafficking. And they even agreed to stop making new guns that could hold over 10 rounds of ammunition, which are frequently used in mass shootings. All of these things sound completely reasonable, right? Especially considering that 120 Americans are shot and killed every single day, and more than 200 others are shot and wounded. It's past time for gun companies to do something about it, right? And finally, a gun manufacturer is stepping up to save lives. Sounds too good to be true? You're right. Unfortunately, the gun manufacturer that agreed to do these things, Smith & Wesson, did so back in 2000 in the face of legitimate lawsuits, but then never followed through. Why? Let's rewind. See, back in the early 1990s, gun violence was rising, and leaders were looking for ways to reduce it. One solution was to go directly to the firearms industry and demand they act ethically and be part of the solution. Leaders weren't just asking nicely. They were fed up with the way gun makers were fueling gun violence, and they were filing lawsuits to hold bad actors accountable. Smith & Wesson decided to come to the negotiating table to settle the lawsuits. But the rest of the gun industry wasn't happy with these reasonable concessions and, cheered on by the NRA, organized a boycott of Smith & Wesson. This caused their sales to plummet, and they almost went bankrupt. The CEO was ousted, and the company walked away from the agreement. Fast forward 20 years. In the 2 decades since Smith & Wesson failed to follow through on those promises, gun deaths in America have surged, increasing 70% from 2000 to 2021. Since 2020, guns have been the leading cause of death for kids, teens, and young adults. But rather than doing anything meaningful to protect people from the harm, death, and trauma that comes from their products, the gun industry has doubled down on protecting itself and its revenue, which adds up to around $9 billion a year. That's one killer business. Take this, for example. In 2004, the gun industry lobbied lawmakers hard to let the federal assault weapons ban expire. No ban meant gun manufacturers could make deadlier guns and rake in bigger profits. And that's just what they did. Then, in 2005, the industry, with help from the NRA, lobbied hard again and got Congress to pass their dream legislation, the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, or PLACA. The law gives gun companies a type of far-reaching immunity that virtually no other industry has, and insulates them from most civil lawsuits that could really hold them accountable. Since PLACA passed, even with all the gun deaths in our country, not a single gun manufacturer accused of negligence for contributing to gun violence has had to stand trial. And that's not right, because lawsuits are one of the most important tools the public has to hold businesses accountable for products or practices that harm people. Can you imagine if any other product led to 43,000 American deaths per year, but the manufacturer faced almost no repercussions? It's a total anomaly. When tobacco companies and opioid makers have contributed to the deaths of thousands of people, those companies were held accountable in court. Cars are required to have airbags because consumers filed lawsuits. Simply put, the threat of having to face a jury is a good way to get companies to take consumers' concerns seriously. But the gun industry has a virtual free pass. Since PLACA became law, the gun industry has continued to make their products deadlier. They've kept selling guns to rogue gun dealers operating at the edge of the law. They've made DIY kits that allow people to build their own untraceable ghost guns at home with zero questions asked. And they market guns to kids and teens, use militaristic imagery in their ads, and play on people's fears to drive up sales. But it doesn't have to be this way. The gun industry's immunity is far-reaching, but it's not absolute. And we have a team of lawyers who have found ways to pierce that immunity shield and hold the worst offenders accountable in court. Moms Demand Action and Students Demand Action have also helped pass laws in states across the country that let more survivors sue bad actors in the gun industry, including when they haven't taken reasonable steps to prevent gun violence. And we'll keep working to demand that gun manufacturers make their products safer, stop marketing to kids, and take common sense steps to make sure their guns aren't ending up in the hands of criminals. Over 20 years ago, some in the gun industry were willing to take real steps to save lives because they knew that if they didn't, it would cost them big time. It's time to force the gun industry back to the negotiating table. But they won't do it unless we pressure them. If you're ready to join us in taking on the gun industry, text INDUSTRY to 64433. Together, we can end gun violence.